though, it's still tie control versus green-red devotion.
And this is a matchup where I think green-red devotion matches up a little bit worse than it does, the green-white deck does, because there's less durability against sweepers. You don't have something like Master of the Unseen to power through sweepers. So Crux of Fate's going to be a very big player for Danny in this matchup.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that normally you might think is that Danny has a lot of main deck cards like Disdainful Stroke, so the Crater's Claws that Berni might use to end the game are at risk.
Yeah, in a matchup against Sultai, I would probably rather have Crater's Claws than something like, or excuse me, I would rather have Master of the Unseen than something like Crater's Claws.
All right, so Danny on the play starts out on a Opulent Palace, then goes to Satyr Wayfinder. Satyr finds a temple and we pass back. Robert, though, once again with the turn 1 Elvish Mystic, it's one of the best things this deck can do is get early ramp. Temple of Abandon on the next play sees a land, see whether he wants to keep that one. Crater's Claws is in his hand right now. And land is not what he's looking for. It'll go to the bottom, and he has another mana creature, that's Sylvan Caryatid, as we've seen so many times in this Devotion deck, threatening to make a 5-drop on turn 3.
But Danny with a very nice draw there with a Thoughtseize. He has Disdainful Stroke, so he can go after a big thing. Ideally counter another big thing and leave Robert with very little in the way of resources. Yeah,
he will start on Thoughtseize. Gets to see what Robert's on. Robert's hand, you can see he's not thrilled about tossing the hand over. It's going to be Nykthos, Voyaging Satyr, Crater's Claws, and Whisperwood Elemental. So again, Robert did have the turn 3 Whisperwood, but that's certainly not going to happen. Danny takes that card out of his hand, leading with Crater's Claws and Voyaging Satyr.
And you can see how much different this would be if Crater's Claws was something like Master of the Unseen instead.
He'd already be in play.
Yeah, he would be in really good shape instead. He's got to try to find something to do with that Crater's Claws, which is going to be very tough to do against Danny unless Robert's in an already overwhelming position.
And island and pass back. So lands in Danny's hand, has a Hero's Downfall, has a Crux of Fate. He has time, as we've seen him use a lot this tournament.
And you can see, with land drops ready to go, he's got a Hero's Downfall, a Crux of Fate. This is going to be a very hard mixture of cards for Robert to beat this game. His draw step last turn with another copy of Crater's Claws. Danny's at 18. Robert not really realistically getting a 4-power creature to play for a while. I think Danny's got already pretty firm control of this game.
Yeah, Voyaging Satyr was the play for Robert. That was a card that Danny knew about. Danny will go ahead and scry this turn. At some point, Robert, though, did pick up a Nykthos that turn. He may be able to start throwing these Crater's Claws off at different targets. But you see Danny just, with an Ashiok, however, flips 3 cards. It's Whisperwood, Elemental, Ugin, and a land. So Whisperwood, that'll be a threat that Robert will have to punch down.
And Robert really not in a position to threaten the Ashiok in combat. He can use Crater's Claws to get rid of it, but this is not a card that Danny needs by any stretch to win the game. So if he wants to trade it, that's fine. And if Ashiok gets to run wild, that's cool too.
Draw was another Nykthos for Robert, so that's nothing he can use to develop his board. He'll spend his entire turn casting Crater's Claws for 5 on the Ashiok Nightmare Reaver. We go back to Danny. Basically traded cards 1 for 1. That's what he wants to do, and made a land drop. So
exactly. Just trade. Eventually he finds Dig Through Time or something similar to that, or one of his big planeswalkers, and that should be enough to wrap up the game. It's turn 5, and he doesn't even have to use the Crux of Fate. In fact, he won't here because there's just no reason to.
Yeah, he drew Sultai Charm for the turn, so remaining cards in Danny's hand, he has Hero's Downfall, Sultai Charm, Crux of Fate, so 3 kill spells, and the last one, Disdainful Stroke. So 3 kills and a counter.
Not bad.
Sounds great, especially against a hand where there's not a card he knows, there's not really a card that Robert has that Danny has to deal with. His hand's just a Crater's Claws.
And any top deck that Robert may have here, Danny has very well covered.
Voyaging Satyr will swing in for 1. Well, there's some damage that Robert can get in. As he drew Forest for the turn, he'll go ahead and play it. And Sultai Charm on end step for Danny. That's going to be a draw 2 and a discard. That is a show of strength on Jessup's side.
Yeah, if he has the luxury of casting this against your Pelucranos Whisperwood Elemental deck, things are probably not going well.
Draws Ashiok and Satyr Wayfinder, so he'll discard the Wayfinder, keep the Ashiok. Now draws a land for the turn. And we'll see Nightmare Weaver number 2, quite possibly. Danny's going to go ahead and start by cracking a fetch land. Down to 16. Healthy life total. Danny does not know anything about the contents of Robert's hand right now. We know that it is another Nykthos and a Crater's Claws. Robert has the ability right now to build up to maybe 1 big Crater's Claws, but he's got to suspect that a counterspell will lie in wait.
Yeah. And Danny's also at 16, so we're really far away from that being a prospect.
And there's the Ashiok, mills 3 cards. We get a Courser of Krufix and a Voyaging Satyr. Will pass back. Robert may have to spend that last Crater's Claws to deal with this Ashiok. Will Danny counter? He might. And then again, he may just let Ashiok go.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't even bother. Inevitability is on Danny's side. If the Ashiok doesn't kill, it'll be something else. I wouldn't get too concerned trying to fight over this Ashiok.
Another land drawn by Robert. It's a forest. We go to his turn. Robert going to have to spend his Creator's Claws to get rid of these Ashiok. It's not how he wants to be spending them by any means. So they receive Creator's Claws for 5 at Ashiok. And Danny will be aggressive. He will Disdainful Stroke here. And it is safe because Bernie spent his whole turn doing that too.
Yeah, I think that Danny really, it's hard for him to lose the game unless Robert draws exceptionally well over the course of several turns in a row,
Sure.
and Danny floods out. That's the scenario I'm concerned about playing around, and therefore I wouldn't bother protecting the Ashiok.
He draws another Ashiok for the turn 2. Elvish Mystic traded away with Satyr Wayfinder that turn. Ashiok went down to 4, but now it's up to 6 again as it mills some more mana creatures. These are some Sylvan Caryatids. Draft turn for Jessup, yeah, was a second Ashiok. So now an Ashiok, Hero's Downfall, Crux of Fate. And Voyaging Satyr is going to tick away at the Ashiok, but it's going to plus faster than it goes down. Voyaging Elvish Mystic the play by Berni, and Ashiok will continue milling. And one thing I have noticed here, we've watched Danny a lot of times on camera this weekend. I don't know if we've ever seen him minus an Ashiok.
No, he's been very patient about it. And in this, he's just saying, I'm milling you for 3 every turn. If something really good comes up, that's sweet. But the way the game's shaping up here, you have to add more to your board to be able to do anything. And at that point, Crux of Fate sweeps everything up. So there's no rush for him to act.
Yeah. He even has good targets. We do see things like Courser of Krufix. It's an excellent card here. But Whisperwood Elemental added to the exile pile. And also important was the draw for Danny this turn. That was Garruk Apex Predator, and that may just be it.
I think Danny's entire plan here is just to run Robert out, make him commit one more big threat to the table. Crux of Fate sweeps that up. Then you have Hero's Downfall for a follow-up big play, and Robert just can't draw well enough, fast enough to be able to overpower all that stuff.
And here's land number 7. Danny's going to fetch for it, and in is going to come the finisher. That's going to be the 7-mana Planeswalker. There you have it. Garruk Apex Predator back on the battlefield. That's going to accompany Ashiok, and it's going to make 3/3 Black Death Touch beasts. And that should put a stop to Bernie's attacks. On Bernie's side, no help there. We're going to go on to game 2, just I believe with 2 more copies of Nykthos in his hand.
Just a bell-to-bell domination there from Danny. Thoughtseize plus removal spells left Robert with a hand with just some Creator's Claws and mana creatures, and that wasn't nearly enough to get the job done.
And Thoughtseize is certainly one of those cards that scales well against devotion strategies. It's pretty good against any deck that's trying to ramp.
Or any deck that just has a little bit of A, a little bit of B, and a little bit of C, and needs all of it to execute its game plan. Devotion definitely qualifies, and Thoughtseize took the one critical piece out of Robert's hand, which was Whisperwood Elemental, and the rest of his hand didn't really allow him to do very much.
I'm going to quickly go over some of the sideboard options we have here. On Bernie's side, he's going to look to get bigger, look for more card advantage, and look for things that are harder to answer. He has copies of cards like Nissa Worldwaker, Genesis Hydra, and even Xenagos, God of Revels as potential options for this matchup.
Yeah, and I think he might want to just become more threat dense in general. Even something like Arbor Colossus, which is by no means good in the matchup, Danny can kill it pretty easily, and there's not really flyers for Robert to kill. I think he just may want a little less mana acceleration, a little more just oomph, just some staying power.
Yeah, absolutely. More threats can never be bad here. As you saw, he more or less lost that game as he didn't have enough threats.
Exactly. On Danny's side, 3 copies of Courser of Krufix, 2 Drown Sorrow, 2 Farika's Cure, 2 Negate, 2 copies of Tassiger the Golden Fang, a Disdainful Stroke, an Aether Spouts, a Pearl Lake Agent, and a Cure the Crashing Wave. I'm honestly not really stoked about Danny's sideboard here for the matchup. I think Drown Sorrow's okay. I think Tassiger's okay. The Disdainful Stroke is quite good, but I think he's going to sideboard pretty light.
Yeah, most of his best options are in the main deck, to be sure. As we get over for that. One thing that we were talking about with StarCityGames.com, we want to talk a little bit, though, about the creature collection that we have. You've seen these go on over the course of the year at Star City Game Nights and on our tokens. We have 4 all-new creature. We're now announcing that we are going to have creature collections. This is 4 all-new creature collection products released by season. So right now we have released 3 different creatures and 1 new one in our parody season. These are on playmats, sleeves, and dice bag, not a deck box. But the ones we have right now, we have the Mammoth, the Wolf, and the Rat. Those are the creature tokens. Then we have our 1 parody card. That's the Eternal Witness, the product by Andrea Radek, who will be doing our other creature collection products.
And again, all available on card sleeves, playmats, and dice bags. You can head over to StarCityGames.com/creature collection to order items today, or head over to the dealer booth at any open or Grand Prix we're vending at.
You see, going into the sideboard here, a decisive game one for Jessup. Remember, the winner of this should be in our top 8. The loser not eliminated, but he'll have to win the next match and make sure that things break his way. For Jessup, I don't think tiebreakers are an issue. Berni could really stand to use a win here.
Yeah. I mean, X3 is probably going to be a solid record here, though. Remember, the tournament was quite large, 762 players, so the records needed for top 8 will be a lot more competitive. We've had opens that were smaller where, all the X3s and maybe some of the X3-1s and some not will make the top 8. I think this is probably going to be tilted towards the other side where...
Yeah, and when you're in a situation like Berni where you start out with your 2 losses very early and are running the table, oftentimes it does place you at the end of the tiebreaker math, which means when at all possible, you'd like to not rely on tiebreakers to get into the top 8.
Yeah, we may have a clean cut for top 8 here, but if some of the X3s do miss, Robert or players in his tiebreaker scenario are likely to be the ones to miss. Jessup, on the other hand, as you mentioned, if he does end up X and 3, he should be fine.
Remember, Jessup started out the tournament 6-0. I don't think he's been any lower than 20th at any point this tournament.
Yeah, he's been pretty good start. Hasn't really tripped up at any point here.
Picked up. Judge has been pretty dominant here. Did pick up a loss to Hal Brady, I believe.
Yes.
On day 1. And has gotten 1 loss just last round, but that's it.
Pretty good trip out here for Danny and Jim Davis.
Yeah, both at 11-2 here, playing for their top 8 slots. Jim last round did pick up his second loss to Robert Berni. Jim on Jeskai Aggro and Danny on Sultai Control. Certainly kind of that situation where this aggro deck has aggro struggles against ramp, but Control has a much more solid matchup.
Well, it depends on the specific permutations of the ramp deck. I do think Green-White's matchup is fine against Control decks because Master of the Unseen just gives you such a powerful way to play around sweepers and such.
Yeah, it is one of the scary parts about that Green-White deck.
For Robert, a deck that doesn't have something like that just has to ramp into big threats, I'm sure the pure Control matchup is the one he's looking to avoid the most. You saw Danny won that game with Crux of Fate and Hero's Downfall still left over. He didn't even have to go to those cards.
Right, he had this sweeper that he never had to cast.
The game never really felt like Danny was at any risk of losing.
Yeah, he had extra sweepers and extra removal in hand, and I don't believe Danny resolved a card draw at any point. He actually just played lands and kill spells, and that was enough. We'll see if Berni can do better, though. He's much more threat dense this time.
And, these mulligans are so bad for Robert, too, as a result of this, because, again, without Mastery of the Unseen, he just has to get to something big. Most of that stuff Danny can swat away pretty easily, and so Robert needs every card he can get his hands on to be able to execute his game plan.
Yeah, the Crater's Claws certainly helps him in stuff. I think even in matchups like the Devotion Mirror, for example, it's a pretty big boon to Robert that he has Crater's Claws in that mastery spot. And in a lot of these proactive matchups, it can be pretty helpful. We saw round 1, he played against red-green aggro, and Crater's Claws did a ton of work there. He was firing it off for upwards of 10 damage at his opponent to just really close out these races.
Any deck that's of medium speed or faster, I think Crater's Claws is a pretty big boon. Against the aggressive decks, it's a good removal spell. It's also a way to win the game out of nowhere. And the mid-range matchups and the Devotion Mirrors, the ground just gums up a good percentage of the time. It's hard to attack. And in Houston and in Dallas, we've seen games where Robert just sort of set up a shop of blockers, made attacking pretty hard, eventually got Nykthos and a Voyaging Satyr, and that was enough to crank out a Crater's Claws for lethal without Robert having to do any work in combat.
Yeah, medium speed or faster, it's good, but Danny Jessup's deck, it is not medium speed or faster. It's on the slow end of things.
Yeah, this is about as slow as it gets in Standard.
All right, both players trade lands to start off the game. You do see Voyaging Satyr and Courser of Krufix in Berni's hand, so he can make up that card advantage loss from the mulligan pretty quickly here. Draw was Crater's Claws. He's probably looking to avoid that draw, at least early on in this game.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Robert sided out a few copies of Crater's Claws, but not all of them. It's a powerful weapon to have in the arsenal, but as you mentioned, it's just not something you want to draw early on in the game.
Risky keep here for Robert. He went for a turn, on turn 3, he went for Courser of Krufix and did not flip a land off the top, which means he doesn't have a land for the turn. This is a great opportunity for Danny to just resolve Ashiok Nightmare Weaver. You see Robert's draw for the turn. That was a Temple. So he will hit his land, but no free land once again off Courser.
Yeah, the Ashiok versus Courser on the other side of the table staring contest is pretty odd.
Yeah, and Danny's Ashiok hit one of Robert's other Coursers. So that is really going to force, Robert will have to knock this Ashiok down a bit.
I think so.
I think for him, there's a decision. If he only hits the Ashiok with Courser, Danny will have the option of cashing in the Ashiok to play Robert's Courser. And if Robert doesn't want to see that happen, he'll have to use his mana creature to attack, but he doesn't have another untapped land in hand, so that may cost him his whole turn.
Yeah.
Then again, if Robert's been watching Danny, it seems to me unlikely that Danny will minus this Ashiok. Or at least we haven't seen him do it yet.
Well, if Danny's at risk of missing land drops here, or if he feels like the Courser's not going to do, the Ashiok rather is not really going to do a whole bunch else, we'll see. But yeah, Danny's play pattern here has just been sit on Ashiok, use it to absorb attacks. He has not been in any rush to put anything into play. If he's going to lose it for no value otherwise, then you might see him go ahead and just get while the getting's good and put a Courser into play. But the play,
Sure.
The plays that Danny has done up to this point suggest that that's not what really what he's up to.
Temple for Robert scries Elvish Mystic to the bottom, puts Genesis Hydra now as the new top card. Robert wanting to see what the play was there. And both now he still has to make the decision. He knows Courser is going at Ashiok, but is the Satyr coming too? No, it's just going to be the Courser. Ashiok drops down to 3. So, second Courser for Robert. Interesting choice for Danny. He can keep the Ashiok or he can get himself a 2/4.
And Danny's hand right now is pretty land heavy, so I'm not sure how much interest he has in taking the Courser. Although if he's not able to kill anything, then he's just losing this Ashiok for very little in combat next turn.
Yeah, well, he pluses the Ashiok to 5. That mills 3 creatures. It gets Genesis Hydra, Voyaging Satyr, and Robert's one-of copy of Xenagos, God of Revels.
I have a lot of Blossoms here, though. That's a great card for Robert to see while he's just kind of light on resources and the game's still in its development stages.
Yeah, it is the new draw for Robert. He is light on lands, as you mentioned. We go back over to Danny. It's going to be Satyr Wayfinder. He's just trying to buy time. In the mills, he finds an island, mills, Dig Through Time, Bioblight, and Thoughtseize. But the land for the turn, what he was looking for anyway. So now he has 2 mana up. He'll pass the turn back. Eidolon of Blossoms drawn for Robert, but no lands just even yet.
But not necessarily the end of the world here, as Robert can play the Eidolon and try to get a new look at it. Though Danny took an untapped land here and didn't play one of his temples, so probably an indicator that something like Disdainful Stroke is hanging out in his hand.
And knowing that, Robert is just going to swing the team at Ashiok. Satyr Wayfinder jumps in front of a Courser. Ashiok down to 2. And Robert will use Creator's Clause to finish it off. And at 2, it can't be Disdainful Stroke, so Robert's spending his entire turn and a card to get rid of Ashiok.
Though this is the stage where if Danny has Crux of Fate, it is a backbreaker.
Yeah, it would take care of all the creatures on the board. We'll see if Danny can do it. It does not look like it. He's going to play 3 mana. That's another Ashiok. So just as soon as Robert deals with the first, here comes another. And Danny, I think, knowing he's going to lose these Planeswalkers, he's just looking for time. It's Genesis Hydra and Boon Satyr that were the mills.
Yeah, he's absorbing a lot of damage here, though. These Ashioks aren't really doing very much. He needs removal and supers to supplement the Ashiok. On its own, it's not much of a game plan.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, though. Danny is absorbing a lot. He is still at 19, but not making forward movement. For Robert, though, it means he gets to draw Wooded Foothills. Top card Voyaging Satyr. The double coursers have not found a card yet that he can use. And he'll swing the team all 5 damage at Ashiok again, and Danny lets it go.
I mean, Robert can't be too upset with how this is going. 2 Ashioks down and really no damage done by them.
Yeah, he has to wonder what's going on. I mean, Dig Through Time seems like a likely candidate that Danny's building up toward. This is going to be the first turn. Well, actually, no, it's only 5 cards in graveyard and 2 mana up. Danny still can't dig yet. For Robert, he's going to go ahead and crack his fetch line. Doesn't really want to draw Voyaging Satyr. Gets a forest out of his deck. See if he's going for a play here. And I believe right now we are checking on the triggers for Courser of Krufix. Now Robert up to 23.
Yeah, just a quick confirmation of life totals here.
Both players still a pretty healthy life. And Robert will get a new top card, and that's going to be Whisperwood Elemental. That's a pretty big improvement, as he'll play Eidolon of Blossoms, or attempt to draw that Whisperwood. Danny will have none of it. That's going to be Disdainful Stroke. Now, if you're if you're Danny here, Robert, the fact that he disdainful stroked while you have a Whisperwood Elemental on top of your deck, what does that tell you? If anything.
That Eidolon of the Blossoms is good enough where it's just worth countering in that spot, which I feel like it is. Almost no matter what else is going on in Danny's hand.
Third Ashiok from Danny, and it's a big one. It hits 2 of Robert's remaining Whisperwood Elementals. And very interesting usage of these Ashioks. No sooner to say he hits 2 of the Whisperwood Elementals, as Robert shows that, well, he does have more. Another one's on top of the deck. He'll try to take down Ashiok again, and that will do it. Third Ashiok in the graveyard. Danny only plays 3.
Big turn here for Robert.
Plays Eidolon of Blossoms, draws Whisperwood Elemental.
Gets to nick those for his troubles, too, off the courser.
Yeah, and that means next turn he is poised to really make a big play. He'll draw Genesis Hydra. He has a ton of mana and a Nykthos. We see a Thoughtseize here from Danny, and, well, there's already Genesis Hydra in Robert's hand to go with the one on top of the deck. Danny will take Whisperwood Elemental.
At this point, you can be pretty sure that Danny's not slow rolling anything.
There's no Crux of Fate. That would have happened that turn for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to concern yourself with Ugin here, which I think means that Robert's likely to just play Whisperwood Elemental.
Well, I believe his Whisperwood's gone. Danny thought left him with a pair of Genesis Hydras. The one in hand and one that he drew for the turn. So Robert, looking through his exile pile, wants to see what exactly he's fishing for with this Genesis Hydra.
Yeah, because Danny's hand at this point, you know he drew Thoughtseize. He's had plenty of opportunities to cast Dig Through Time. So his hand is possibly a removal spell he doesn't want to cast yet because all these cards are about the same. Ugin or lands. That's kind of the only story that makes sense.
So 7, 5, 12. This is a Genesis Hydra for 15, I believe. 13 is for 15 mana. It is a 13/13. And he gets a large choice of cards here. Among them, the one-of copy of Ugin that he plays here.
Yeah, Ugin's not a bad insurance policy against Ugin either. This is a pretty...
He is colorless, can't blow it up.
Yeah, this is pretty good too.
And Robert, having pulled through here, now has a huge board. And that'll plus up. 3 damage goes across to Jessup. And it looks like Nykthos on top. 6 damage on the attack. Danny down to 8. As we go back to Jessup, this should just be... Yeah, he has a Dig Through Time that he drew. He'll have to hit a lot.
Yes. And he doesn't have a lot of time to deploy everything either. So it needs to be Crux of Fate plus an answer to Ugin.
Right.
And he doesn't have a lot of life to play with.
So start. Can he find the sweeper? Here's Dig Through Time. 2 copies of Crux of Fate in the deck. Can he find one of them? He certainly needs a sweeper of some sort. And from there, he'll have to sculpt a plan. Ugin will still be in play.
It looks like Crux of Fate was one of the cards. So that's a starting point.
Yeah, looking at what he wants for a second one, he could have Disdainful Stroke or a second Dig Through Time, deliberates and decides on second Dig Through Time. So he'll sweep, and then he'll look for more answers next turn. Here's a Temple. That'll ship to the bottom. And with 5 mana, it's Aether Spouts, actually,
Okay.
not Crux of Fate. Draw for Robert. Berni was a copy of Nykthos. We'll see if Robert plays around the Aether Spouts. He'll start by shooting upstairs for 3 with Ugin. Danny goes down to 5. And he is going to swing the team.
Okay. Aether Spouts could be pretty solid here. I mean, it's still, at the end of the day, Robert's going to be able to redevelop pretty quickly here.
Now, there's a danger here. If you look at the blue mana that Danny has, they are both copies of Yavimaya Coast, which means he doesn't even want to show the Aether Spouts because he has to go to 3 to cast it. The Ugin is lethal.
Very interesting stuff there. I thought Danny might have been able to play on with another Dig Through Time the next turn, but I guess concealing Aether Spouts is more valuable than the extremely low percentage chance you have to win the game from that spot.
Yeah, so he'd have to then dig into Heroes. He'd Aether Spouts and then dig into Heroes Downfall.
Yeah.
Which isn't unreasonable, but is difficult.
And then you had to beat the follow-up, too, because the Idol, like, Robert gets to set, all right, I'll put Eidolon as the card I'm drawing next turn.
Robert gets to pick the order, and that's important.
So he gets to draw Eidolon into Courser. He rebuilds very quickly.
All right, so we'll just go ahead and go on to game 3. And I want to talk about the Ashiok management in that game. Not that it, because Danny chose a very interesting strategy here. The Ashioks were all just basically played as large life gain spells.
Well, Ashiok honestly stunk up the joint that game. Danny drew 3 of them. One of them ate a Creator's Claws, and the other ones just got attacked down. The problem is that if Danny, let's say Danny says, all right, right now I can't protect this Ashiok. I'm going to hold my hand for a little while. Robert could develop a board where by the time you're ready to play Ashiok, he might just say, all right, attack you. You're close to dead, and I don't have to worry about it.
And then they really don't do anything.
So they were really, really bad that game, but I don't think that Danny could have played the game in such a fashion to get more out of them.
Now, how do you feel about early on in the game, Danny had this option between plussing Ashiok to 5 and then minusing his own Ashiok away just to get one of Robert's Courser of Krufix?
Given the way that it played out, because the Ashioks were so poor and Danny drew so many of them, that play would have been better. At the time, Danny's hand was land heavy enough where the Courser wasn't particularly valuable. I think you want to say, well, I'm going to get some draw steps here. It's gonna make Robert spin his tires for a little while. It's still risky for Robert to deploy too much of his board because if I draw one of my Crux of Fates or some other sweeper, he loses everything and I keep my Ashiok. So Robert has to play this pretty challenging game of put enough pressure to Ashiok where it isn't problematic long term while not exposing himself too badly to a sweeper. So the first one I thought was fine. I liked what Danny did with them. The second and third ones were more of a consequence of the circumstances that he was in. There was just nothing to be done with them.
You could play them, plus them, and then they would die.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's unfortunate. I think if he has one of those additional Ashioks on the turn, when he has one Ashiok at 3, he's much more inclined to -3, get a Courser, play another Ashiok.
Right, he didn't have the other Ashioks at the time. So the way that he played that game made sense given the circumstances. Just if he knew how his top of his deck was arranged, he would have done different things.
Which actually I want to go back to a play that Robert made. The second shot that Danny had at it, Robert went and very aggressive with one of his mana creatures to knock that Ashiok to 2 to keep Danny off that line. So Danny got to untap. He drew a second Ashiok for the turn, but at that point his Ashiok was already at 2 instead of 3. So now armed with the information of a second Ashiok, if he could, he would go for the Courser. But Robert made a very aggressive play to take him off that mana.
Exactly. So very interesting game there, even though it sort of looks like on the surface that Danny just sort of flooded out and nothing happened. The game was defined by those early Ashioks.
It's hard to say because, he did draw a lot of lands, but you can't really say flooded out because he drew spells. The composition was weak. Ashiok's not a card you want to see just in multiples.
When your opponent's able to attack down the first one, it usually means they're able to attack down the second one.
We're underway for Game 3. Berni and Jessup. This is a decider. Winner likely in top 8. We start on Jessup's side and a temple. Looking at his hand, he has additional lands, a Hero's Downfall, a Bio Blight. It's removal and lands, more or less what he wants to do, and believe a Dig Through Time to tie it together.
Yeah, Dig Through Time I think is one of the most important cards in the matchup here because these two decks trade resources, but you don't want to just trade one for one all day long. You need to push ahead at some point. So removal spells backed up by Dig Through Time is about the perfect hand for Danny.
Right now deciding between whether he wants to leave up black or play his Opulent Palace. He'll play the Polluted Delta so that he could Bio Blight. But for Berni, it's just a land and a pass back. And Aether Spout's the draw for Jessup.
And we saw last game, Robert really, by the looks of things, it was not a card on his radar.
And it's interesting positioning going here with Danny's land drops. He has an Opulent Palace he wants to play. Last turn he left up Bio Blight. Robert did not cooperate and play a 3-drop. Now you see him play Polluted Delta in case Robert makes something like Courser of Krufix or some 3-drop. Danny wants to be able to use the Hero's Downfall in his hand. It's just an interesting dynamic in terms of mana efficiency.
Well, he wants to just be able to just cast the reactive spells in his hand as appropriate if he thinks it's likely to line up the right way, which the Bio Blight on turn 2 could against Voyaging Satyr, like this Courser does against the Hero's Downfall. And as long as it's not interfering with a 4-mana play or what have you, then it's basically free for him to wait on the Opulent Palace for a little while. There's no rush.
And you see the ends up Hero's Downfall from Jessup. We got a short window for Robert to check his top card, which is another Forest. As we'll pass back over to Jessup. He's really just been buying time until he hits that Dig Through Time.
Yeah. And that's a very powerful game plan in this matchup, Just remove, dig for some way to lock up the game, or 2 pieces of reaction, 2 removal spells, and Robert only has so much gas in the deck.
Back over to Danny. Now finds the window for Opulent Palace, and he'll pass back the turn. Robert drawing the Forest. Be on all green mana right now, and it'll be Eidolon of Blossoms for him. Will that resolve? Waiting to see. Does not look like there's a disdainful stroke from Jessup.
Yeah, he has one in hand, but I think right now his hand cannot handle Whisperwood Elemental, so he wants to save that as insurance there.
Yep, he Bioblights it after the card is drawn. Draws Thoughtseize for the turn, though. That's going to be a very powerful one. And now we'll get to see what Bernie's on. As Danny Thoughtseizes, we see Genesis Hydra, Nissa Worldwaker, Boonsatyr, Pelucranos, Crater's Claws. This is a lot of action.
Yeah, this is a hand that's capable of overpowering the Disdainful Stroke. Not a lot to be done with a Bioblight in this hand also.
Yeah, well, the Bioblight took care of the Eidolon Blossoms, so I believe Danny's remaining hand is Disdainful Stroke, Aether Spouts, and Dig Through Time.
Aether Spouts is a pretty potent answer against Nissa, though. It's not a long-term solution, but if you've got other stuff going on, it can do a lot of work.
The difficulty in Planeswalkers is that Danny's hand can't actually pressure the Nissa, so she can build up toward going ultimate very easily. He does have to be careful of that. And as a result, yeah, Thoughtseize will go ahead and take the Nissa. So leaves with 2 Pelucranos, a Crater's Claws, and a Genesis Hydra.
And this can be a really efficient turn.
Robert will start on, he did not draw his 5th land, he did draw an Elvish Mystic.
And not willing to deploy the Pelucranos here, just saying I'm going to Boonsatyr and Elvish Mystic. And save this for a better spot.
Playing around possible Disdainful Strokes.
Yeah, I think so. The tempo loss is so bad there, especially because casting Disdainful Stroke would not prevent Danny from casting Dig Through Time as well. And those are the kind of sequences where the control deck just pulls ahead, where they answer your turn and get to dig. Robert's going to make some efforts here to avoid that from ever happening.
And it'll be Dig Through Time from Danny. He does have the window with which to do it. And here we see 7 cards. This, she said, such a key card in the matchup. And looks like Disdainful Stroke has taken off the Dig Through Time. See what other kind of removal he wants to get. Other options like Bioblight and Drown in Sorrow available. And I believe Drown in Sorrow was the second one taken.
Well, Drown in Sorrow is a really nice pickup here for Danny because Robert's play last turn indicated that he plans on playing the Elvish Mystic, which you see him play, and then deploy the Boonsatyr in his hand. So this allows Danny to take his lumps, drown away that board, and now Disdainful Stroke covers the follow-up play from Robert because the rest of his hand's so chunky.
So Danny with those 2 pickups gets to untap. Perhaps another Thoughtseizes the draw. And we'll just continue to chip away at Robert's hand. There's second Thoughtseize from Danny. He'll go down to 14. These Thoughtseizes is so strong against the Devotion deck.
Right, especially in Robert's spot here where, he's trying to play around certain things, and the Thoughtseizes are, at that point when Danny takes a card out of the hand, it's such a strong representation of what his response is. That it just makes the game very hard for Robert to play.
And Danny could really get a great bind here. One of the things that Robert's considering doing is flashing in Boonsatyr so Danny doesn't Thoughtseize it. If Robert does that, Danny's Drown in Sorrow gets to be cast this turn.
Well, Danny might just say, you can have it this turn, because I don't think he wants to put the shields down on Disdainful Stroke unless Robert's hand is quite poor. And I don't think Danny has another land drop to make. So I think this turn what's likely to happen, he's going to take something out of this hand. I guess Genesis Hydra is the biggest long-term concern. Whatever, it doesn't really matter all that much.
Yep, and it is the Genesis Hydra.
Take the lumps, and then Drown in Sorrow next turn. He can afford to take 5 points of damage. He doesn't have to do it right now.
And that's exactly what he'll do. Go ahead and draw it back over to Robert. This will be an attack for 5. Looks like he didn't hit the land he wanted. May have hit another Elvish Mystic. But he'll go for Pelucranos. Danny very fast on the Disdainful Stroke for that.
Yeah, this was the whole line of play that Danny was setting up the entire time here.
Draw the turn with Sultai Charm, and here's Drown in Sorrow to take care of the other 2. So just 1 Pelucranos and a Crater's Claw left in Bernie's hand. He has Jessup down to 9, but things get pretty difficult from there. Jessup still with a Disdainful Stroke and Aether Spouts. And now a Sultai Charm. This Pelucranos will also get Disdainful Stroked, and now Robert is just is trying a spell each turn. Passes. Danny draws another Disdainful Stroke. Here's Eidolon of Blossoms from Bernie. Danny's going to probably say no to that one also.
I suspect as much, yep.
3 turns, 3 disdainful strokes.
Now, the risk here is that, Danny's at 9. He's taking some hits here, and Crater's Claws is a concern. He doesn't have an answer for it anymore.
Yeah, Bio Blight was the draw.
Now, there's no red mana in Robert's hand. He doesn't have a lot of mana, period. But as a long-term concern, the Crater's Claws definitely are an issue.
And Elvish Mystic is the play for Robert. Danny's going to Sultai Charm, I believe, to draw 2 and discard. Draws the 4th disdainful stroke and Satyr Wayfinder.
Well, the Satyr Wayfinder is really nice here as a blocker for the Elvish Mystic, and the Disdainful Stroke is insurance policy against a number of cards that Robert can cast here. So that's a very nice Sultai Charm there for Danny.
Now we'll get to untap. He is going to go for the Satyr Wayfinder. Yeah, he discarded away a Bio Blight off that. We see him mill a Dig Through Time, a Sultai Charm, and 2 lands. He'll keep a Temple and scry off that. That one's going to go to the bottom. Danny's still looking for some stabilizing forces here. He just wants to find one of his Planeswalkers, or a Dig Through Time will work. For Robert, though, a pretty big draw. This is going to be a copy of Wooded Foothills, so now he has red mana, 2 Crater's Claws in hand. That does look lethal unless there's a counterspell. I mean, Robert's looking. I think he's going to see 3 disdainful strokes.
Yep. It's a pretty attractive spot, I think, for Robert to just go cast a Crater's Claws, untap, try to cast a Crater's Claws.
Yeah, he has Jessup at 9. And typically, you know there won't be a dissolve here. He may suspect a negate somewhere in the 75 for Danny.
Negate's a pretty hard card to bring in against Green Red Devotion. Most of the
Right.
deck is just creatures. I mean, Robert Berni's list here is...
There's not that much fear of counter magic.
There is Ugin and Crater's Claws. So negate's a pretty narrow card.
So here, Robert's going to go ahead and get the mountain. Yeah, Danny has the remaining counterspell in his deck, but after that, Danny will not have counterspells. Yeah, looks like this is Claws for 5 at Jessup. We put him to 4 if it resolves. Can he let this happen? That's the question. His remaining cards are Temple, Disdainful Stroke, and Aether Spouts. Danny will let that happen. He'll go to 4. Draws Garruk Apex Predator. His last land is a Temple, though he can't cast it just yet. Also needs to leave up that Disdainful Stroke now. And what are your thoughts? He didn't Disdainful Stroke the first Crater's Claws.
I think that I would have cast Disdainful Stroke on it just because Danny's deck plays so many expensive spells that it could be prohibitive to leave up Disdainful Stroke for the rest of the game.
Right, like now he can't cast the Apex Predator with any sort of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Make over to Robert. Well, he's going to try for the win. He'll try Crater's Claws for 4. And yes, Danny does have the Disdainful Stroke. He'll throw it there. And Elvish Mystic taps, makes another Elvish Mystic, and we're back over to Jessup. Sultai Charm, the draw. He has enough mana for Garruk now. If he's willing to go shields down, he probably has to. It's not like he's played 4 Disdainful Strokes. I don't think Robert will respect a counterspell.
No. And the Sultai Charm, he's drawing into a pretty narrow range of cards anyway that would protect him from something like another Crater's Claws, so.
May just be the Planeswalker. Aether Spout's such an interesting card. The second time we've seen Danny draw it, I almost feel like when we watch games with it, it more often never gets cast. The games where you have it the whole game and it never gets cast seem to happen frequently.
Yeah, Danny's gotten out in this spot where he can just go ahead and say, all right, well, I'll discard it to Sultai Charm. But it has not been very impressive in these sideboardy games.
So Garruk pluses. It makes a beast. Robert reading the ability. I think the life gain one is the one he's caring about right now.
Yeah.
I believe Robert's draw for the turn also good. I think it's Nissa Worldwaker. Which means, Robert, with his Elvish Mystics, he can animate a land and send a land in at Jessup.
The problem is that if Robert's plan is, likely to be another copy of Crater's Claws at this point, then allowing Danny an opportunity to gain a large chunk of life is potentially problematic. I think ideally Robert would like to just wait as long as possible with the Elvish Mystics.
Yeah, he will use Nissa. But he's going to use it to untap 4 lands and then play Whisperwood Elemental.
This play is really good from Robert because the biggest threat in play right now is the Whisperwood Elemental. If Danny goes and makes a move with that with Garruk, then he can sacrifice in response and fizzle the life gain trigger.
Exactly. So Danny can't gain life. Yeah, he got to stick an extra threat on the board by playing it this way. It's really well played.
The Nissa's always threatening to make a trampler, which is really tough for Danny because, part of his plan here is probably to chump block out. He also just can't let the Whisperwood Elemental go nuts. I guess because Danny has Aether Spouts in hand, he can try to lean on that as an insurance policy in case Robert's board ever builds up too far, but that's some risky business.
He does have this, so Danny has 8 lands in play, has Aether Spouts and Soul Tide Charm, the ability to cast them both. Now granted, if he wants to cast them both in the same turn, he will take 1 point of damage to do it. He only has 2 non-pain land blue sources. Which with Danny at 3 is not irrelevant, especially when we're looking at how many tramplers Robert may or may not have.
Yeah.
I think he's going to lead on Sultai Charming the Whisperwood. Which means Robert will sack. No reason not to. And now if Danny goes for the Garruk -3 to gain some life, then Robert will... Well, he'd have to... There's nothing worth hitting, I suppose. And Danny may go for the attack here with the Beast Token.
I don't know if I'm a huge fan of the attack here.
If the Nissa was on 3, I think I really like it.
Yeah.
But
I guess with Aether Spouts in hand, he's trying to press Robert into a spot where an Alpha Strike looks attractive.
yeah, Robert drawing a card here. Nissa down to 1. Can animate a land. Remember, these lands will trade with the Garruk Beasts because the Beasts have Death Touch. Danny will take 1 damage each time it happens, but that's acceptable.
Yeah, and this is, I think this is basically the trap being sprung now from Danny.
Yeah, he
with
has
that attack
the Aether Spouts.
With that attack from the Beast last turn, you can look Robert, he's staring at the board. It's just looking pretty attractive to send in a big attack here. In fact, the attack with the Beast is so aggressive that I think Robert is trying to think of what card is in Danny's hand to rationalize it. And I think he's about to find out.
Yeah, swings the team in, and this is exactly what Danny wanted to have happen. A block here, a block there. Letting the 2 Mystics through. He would go to 1 if he just lets this happen. That would be a very slow roll with the Aether Spouts, though. It just seems so appealing to make the play. You're not certain Robert will swing all out again.
Well, yeah, I don't know how... If it's Critter's Claws or bust at this point from Robert's side of the table...
Then he puts the cards on top. Or no, Robert picks where each of them goes?
It's not really that much different going to 1 versus going to 3 or 4 here.
Robert will crack a fetch land. And Robert, the morph may actually be a card here.
Yeah.
And it was another copy of Whisperwood Elemental. And this, here we go. And it is Aether Spouts for Danny Jessup. And all
Big
the
swing
cards.
here, and I imagine that Robert's just shipping everything to the bottom now. Because I don't even think Whisperwood does very much in this spot.
Just hoping to draw Creator's Claws on the next turn.
I think so. I mean,
Well, but if he does that, Danny can minus the Garruk to kill his own creature and get out of Creator's Claws range.
Sure. But I mean, he's always got access to that kind of line of play at some point or another, right? Like you play a creature, and he kills that.
Yeah, I mean, if Robert ships everything to the bottom, I think Danny recognizes, hey, Robert's trying to draw to Creator's Claws. Let's just put a stop to that.
So you think he just has to try to keep him honest here a little bit and keep 1 creature on top?
Yeah, maybe the Whisperwood. It's
Sure.
better than most of your draws anyway.
And it's something that can fizzle Garruk activation as well. So I guess keeping the Whisperwood here is fine.
Danny's draws a land, a lot of power in play, and that Aether Spouts really is the turning point here. 7 power on the board. He's got a Nissa in a spot where he can attack it down.
Yeah, Danny put in a lot of effort there to making sure that Aether Spouts was insane. That attack with the Beast token the previous turn, that was all about inducing an Alpha Strike, and he got paid off for it.
Kind of the long con there, if you would.
And if you go back to game 2, where Danny elected not to play the Aether Spouts there, in a spot where maybe he could play on, well, Wasn't on Robert's radar there.
So if you want to talk about a way that could be on Robert's radar, I will throw back here. The last turn, Danny played his 8th land and passed and had 2 cards. Robert attacks, and the first thing that happens is Danny plays 8th land and then Soul Tie Charmed Robert's Whisperwood Elemental. And think if Robert is very heads up, he thinks, if Danny has a Soul Tie Charm, I mean, is it certain, why is an 8th land getting played here? That's very suspicious. Robert, he did keep Whisper on top. He plays it and manifests. He's at 13 right now. Garruk all the way up to 8. Danny's counting to see if this ultimate is lethal, and I believe it is. So this means whenever anybody attacks Robert, it will get 5/5 and trample.
It's a lot.
It is a ton of damage. That's just a big overrun. And that'll be it. Danny Jessup takes game 3 over Robert Berni, and that should put him into the top 8.
Yeah, that was a great game 3 there from Danny. And not an easy one to play, and I think did a very good job of marshaling his resources, set up the trap with Aether Spouts. It did a lot of good stuff that game, and now should be locked for the top 8.
Well, congratulations to Danny. For Robert, he's going to need some help. He has 1 round to go. He's going to need to win it and hope that the ties break his way.
As you mentioned earlier, maybe a tough spot there for Robert because he started off the tournament with a couple early losses. His tiebreaker is probably towards the bottom of the X3s. We'll have to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, you never know, though. He's had a lot of strong opponents. We've seen him today playing Danny Jessup and Jim Davis. He has enough of his opponents in the top 8. You have to think his breakers will be good no matter how it played out.